Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello and thank you very much for choosing to listen to this QMS podcast. I'm Mark Stephen. This series has been all about health. We've looked at topics like metabolic profiling, the importance of colostrum, how to improve neonatal survival rates in lambs and calves. Basically, it's been all about the animals, but there's another important aspect of welfare that we haven't touched on at all, and that's human health. Unless you, as the livestock manager, are hale and hearty and fit for purpose, that's kind of bound to have an impact on the welfare of your stock and on the effectiveness of your business. So I'm joined today by Chris McVey, Welfare Manager for the RSABI, formerly the Royal Scottish Agricultural Benevolent Institution. Now, they provide practical, emotional and financial support to anyone involved in the Scottish agricultural industry. Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much.
And Hannah MacIntosh has got 2 degrees. Her first one is in counselling and psychotherapy, and she's got a second one in human-animal interaction. She grew up in agriculture and runs a small farm with her husband, farming Hertwick sheep and Shetland cattle. She's worked alongside the RSABI for 3 years, delivering some of the counselling sessions through her own private practice, Chala Psychotherapy. Welcome to you too, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
Chris, I'm going to start off with you. In the context of farming and human health, what are we mainly talking about here, physical or mental health?
I think it's a bit of both. We all know that working in agriculture takes a physical toll in everybody's body, and it can wear you down, both physically and mentally for that. And over the years, it will definitely have an impact on your ability to get out and about and look after your stock. I think for looking at the busier times of the year, when a lot of farms are maybe not taking on staff, they're relying on themselves to do all the graft. The weather's been poor, it's maybe not gone as well as it has done in previous years. It can really have an impact on your mental health as well. So it's a combination of both physical and mental, I would say, and often one will have an impact on the other, especially as you're getting older and you're maybe not, as I say, fit as you once were. And there's maybe a realisation that you can't do all the jobs maybe as quick or as maybe to the best of your ability as you once were able to do. Getting on like that can be tough to accept. And, you know, going back to it as well, not having as much help as well as maybe in previous years as well, can really have an impact and kind of putting all that pressure on yourself, especially during busier times of the year. So I think physical and mental kind of go hand in hand a lot of the time.
The term psychotherapy, Hannah, that I could imagine that could be quite scary to some folk involved in farming. I mean, when people come to you, are they nervous? Are they apprehensive?
Yeah, I think it's normal to be nervous. I think there's so much stigma around mental health in particular and asking for help and you know, just the prospect of going away and talking to somebody about your mental health and what's going on for you. And I think that's why it's important that, you know, whoever you're speaking to, you feel as though you've got some kind of rapport with them and you've got something in common perhaps and you can build up a bit of a relationship. And actually often what people find is really quickly after that first conversation, there's nothing to worry about. Actually, you know, I can talk to Hannah and she understands and she gets it, and I can use a bit of the same language with them and you know, kind of chat a little bit about my farm or about the weather or whatever it is, and then suddenly kind of all that anxiety melts away a little bit and people come to realise that actually all that psychotherapy is having somebody who's impartial, who's not going to judge you, who's not going to give you advice, but who is absolutely going to listen to you.
And when people come to you, what tend to be the nature of their problems?
The biggest one really is stress, and that takes a lot of different forms. I think, you know, farming is stressful. Agriculture is a stressful industry to be in, and that's not getting any better. And I think, you know, financial stress, relationship stress, even just things like weather or the price of fertilizer or whatever it is that's going on, you know, it just all piles up. And I talk a lot about how people can manage the stress and how they can kind of try and limit the stresses a little bit. But what often happens is that stress accumulates and turns into anxiety and depression and low mood.
I very rarely get stressed, Chris. It's not something I suffer from on a regular basis. But when I do, it is always when I know that there's not enough time to do a job properly, or when I'm not fully in control of a situation. I'm sure farming's no different.
No, and absolutely not. As I think as we can all relate to as well, it's as Hannah mentioned about the weather, it can completely knock you for six and put jobs back that you were maybe planning and doing, and then you're running behind. And no, agriculture, I assume it's like that on a day-to-day basis really for a lot of things, and it's just how you manage that stress. I think, in my role as well as welfare manager on a day-to-day basis, no day is the same. You often start on a Monday and then you maybe get an emergency and it knocks your whole week off. So I can relate to that in one aspect, and I think the way that I kind of began to cope with that, because it threw me for six as well, is to accept that there's going to be these things that happen that you don't expect. It's the unexpected things that can drive that stress. But I think when you're involved in agriculture, it's important to try and accept that as much as you can, and then prioritise it, whether what unexpectedly has happened is a priority, or can you just focus on other things that are maybe take priority over that and then come back to it. So it's great to hear, Mark, that it's not something that you kind of come up against and you're able to deal with that. But there's a lot of people out there that just one thing on top of the other, and that builds and builds, and is I think pressure and stress can make us work a bit effectively sometimes, and it kind of motivates us as well. But as Hannah said, it's when that pressure and stress turns into anxiety, and that's when we've got a problem. So it's really important to reach out to the likes of ourselves or Hannah to talk things through and gain a wee bit of perspective.
As you've said, Hannah, you're not there to give advice as a psychotherapist or as a counsellor, but there must be practical tips, strategies that you can suggest.
Yeah, so I talk a lot about stress management, and I talk a lot about prioritising. One of the big things that I spend probably about 90% of my time talking to people about is about their expectations of themselves, and thinking about, what is a reasonable expectation of them of themselves. I think as human beings we are really hard on ourselves by nature, and I think that's probably ramped up a little bit within the farming industry because of how much is at stake really. So often people will be very critical, they'll be very tough on themselves, they'll have really unreasonable expectations about what they can achieve in any given period. And so, we talk a lot about managing those expectations, setting realistic goals. Things like self-compassion and self-care are really important themes that kind of sometimes I have to kind of be quite firm with people about and say, we need to look at this, because there's the saying of fit your own oxygen mask before helping others. If you're not doing all right, how on earth are you going to get through that to-do list?
But it's a really difficult thing to do. If you spent your life looking after stock and basically prioritising their needs, their welfare, to suddenly turn around and say, actually, no, you need to start taking more care of yourself first. That's a hard sell.
Yeah, it is. It's a really difficult thing, and people really struggle with it. And it's not that we're saying, right, you're at the top of the priority list and everything else comes second. It's about saying you're at the top of the priority list alongside everything else, and finding those priorities and being realistic with yourself and with your time, and knowing when to ask for help as well. And I think sometimes the big thing is accepting that the to-do list is never done, and there is stuff that you can just leave and we pick up another day, and it's not the end of the world. It's maybe not what you would want ideally, but it's also not the end of the world. And sometimes really important things like taking an hour out of your day to have a meal with your family actually is as much of a priority as fixing the fence that has been sitting waiting for a week.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a very good friend, John, Chris, who's a few years older than me, and I'm no spring chicken. And he's got a cartoon up on his fridge door, which basically says the major cause of accidents in old men is them thinking they're young men. the passage of time, it's you've got to deal with it, but it's a hard one again.
No, and it absolutely is, and we see on a daily basis, a lot of farmers and crofters out there who they're passionate about what they do. It really comes across. I love listening to people about how passionate they are about what they do and how much enjoyment they get out of it a lot of the time as well. But there gets to a stage in life where you're maybe not able to do what you once were able to do, as you said, Mark, and it can have a really knock-on effect onto your stock, and that's what we always say, is behind a lot of animal welfare issues is a human welfare issue. And the kind of theme that tends to come across more often than not is it's somebody who, has maybe, gotten older and they're not able to do what they once were able to do, but they're really passionate and they're really they've got a lot of pride in what they do, and that can be a big barrier for a lot of people. It's their pride. It's that kind of realization, I suppose, that time is ticking on, and it's they've devoted their life to something, and the thought of not doing that anymore really scares them, and they kind of think to themselves, what am I going to do? And we talk, we spend a lot of hours on the phone to people who are in that situation, trying to get them to think about things outside of farming, spending more time with their family, maybe taking that holiday that they've put off for years or decades, and kind of gaining that wee bit more of perspective about just because one chapter's finishing, the next chapter can begin, and it's kind of taking stock on that. So no, it is a really difficult one, and I can totally kind of understand, but that's why we spend a lot of time talking these things through with people.
Nobody's suggesting for a moment, Hannah, that, because you've got mental health issues, because you're suffering from stress or things are getting on top of you, your animals will necessarily suffer. But I mean, there is a very clear linkage between human health and good animal welfare. Personally, I don't like those television programmes, that tends to be animal welfare charities. They go in and the place is an absolute cow and it's terrible. 9 times out of 10, I find myself sitting there thinking, this person needs help, never mind the puppies.
Absolutely. I think, a farm is made up of people, and these are people's lives and people's entire lives often. When you're working within agriculture, your family is within there, your friends are within there, everything that you do, even your downtime is within that sector, and often people's hobbies are tied up with the day jobs, and it fundamentally is about the person at the center of that, and that's why it's so important that people have somebody to talk to who gets it, somebody who understands, somebody who speaks their language, somebody who is there to listen and is not going to judge, is not going to pass comment or make assumptions, and is there to hear and validate what they're experiencing, because it's hard, and some of the choices that people have to make are painful, and it's useful to have somebody who recognizes that and will sit with them whilst they get there.
How do you talk people through those choices, Chris? Because, the weather's going to be the weather. The cost of fertiliser is probably going to be worse next year more than anything else. The lambs and the calves will keep on coming, etc. So when you're sitting with somebody on the phone trying to offer them practical advice and assistance, what on earth are you saying to them?
It all depends, and everybody's circumstances are different. So we try and go through, I suppose, a process of elimination. So an important thing to ask somebody when they come to us for support is, if we could wave a magic wand, what would be the best outcome for them? What are they looking for? And we kind of start off with that, and then through process of elimination, we kind of get to a route forward. But we have other tools at our disposal. We work really closely with stakeholders and partners. We can arrange a business review for somebody, for instance, through our partnership with Farm Advisory Service relatively quickly, and get a consultant out on farm to kind of go through the books, go through the practicalities of things, and come up with some recommendations and suggestions. If there is a financial element, we can get support through there as well by getting in touch with chartered accountants and other professions like that too. But yeah, often it is bringing a bit of reality to the situation as well, because somebody's number one outcome that they're most hopeful of getting just isn't realistic, and that's difficult for somebody to hear. And we're very compassionate about how we go about that, but we're always coming at it from the point of view as we want the best outcome for that individual. And if there's not going to be that number one solution isn't going to be achievable, then we do kind of need to bring that sense of reality into the picture.
See, that seems eminently sensible to me, Hannah, because the sense of reality in the picture, or changing the perspective, getting someone's mind away from the idea that somehow looking after themselves is a failure, it's a surrender, it's less than they were 10, 20 years ago, something along those lines, and actually say, no, long term, this is actually going to benefit your business and the animals in that farm.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer really, but I think when you're stuck in that cycle of I've got to get all these things done, the bankman's maybe baying at my door, I've got 101 jobs to do, I've got to get sheep away. It's really hard to prioritise yourself and see yourself as an important wheel in that cog, and I guess that's what the counselling does predominantly, is to give a person a space to take a step back and kind of be able to look at themselves and say, okay, this is actually what I need, and hear that. A lot of the counselling work is around reflecting back people's feelings and noticing, you feel really angry about that, or you feel really stuck with this, or this feels like a really difficult, hopeless situation, or you're really challenged by a decision that you've got to make. And it's only by that person having the space to think, really, and take a deep breath and see the situation from a different perspective, that they can then make a decision about, okay, what is it that's right for me, and what is it that's right for my farm and my family.
On that subject, do people tend to turn to their families for help?
I think that's quite dependent. I think, yes, in some senses, and no in others. I think, again, it's a little bit tied up with people feeling, like they might be a failure, or people feeling sometimes guilty that they're leaning on the family because the family have got such a lot on their plate. And, again, it's just about having the space to talk that through and kind of come up with their own solutions and their own path forward through whatever it is that they're going through.
That was quite an impressive list, Chris, that you went through of practical assistance that's on offer from RSABI, with the farm's advisors and accountants and everything else, etc. If people are beginning to feel they need help, or they want somebody just to talk it over, see if they need help, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, we have a helpline that they can contact us on. It's 0300 111 4166. That helpline is available from 7 in the morning until 11 at night, 365 days of the year. So MD can pick up the phone, have a chat with one of our helpline staff and just talk things through. If they are worried about themselves, they can get in touch, but also, if somebody is worried about a family member, a colleague, a neighbour, we do get that a lot as well. So, people do phone up because they're worried about somebody, but usually, if they're worried about their mental health, and we are more than happy, to help, but we just need consent from that person to make sure that they're happy for us to get in touch with them. So that's all that we ask, is for consent, and then to pass on their contact details, and then we'll get in touch.
Chris, thank you very much for speaking to me today. Could you just give me that telephone number again, please? Do it slowly.
Yeah, it's 0300 111 4166.
And that's the helpline for RSABI. Chris McVey, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you, Mark.
And Hannah MacIntosh, it's been a pleasure speaking to you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you found this podcast useful. Until the next one, I'm Mark Stephen. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.